Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Spider-Man just turned 60 this month, meaning that it's now been over 60 years since Amazing Fantasy 15 hit newsstands and changed comic book superheroes forever. Originally, I thought about doing a video just about that issue, but really, what's there to say about the first appearance of Spider-Man that hasn't been said already? It's a story that's firmly etched in all of our cultural imaginations and has been for decades. So this week, I wanted to climb out on a limb and talk about an aspect of the character that I really think is worth discussing: his age. Now, I'm not the only Spider-Man fan to bring this up. Far from it. I know Godzilla Mendoza has actually mentioned this in a few of his videos, but I think there's a reluctance on Marvel's part to really let the character mature, and a perception that it's always a matter of time before he winds up back in high school. There's also, of course, the infamous One More Day storyline, where Peter Parker lets Mephisto dissolve his marriage to Mary Jane, complete with memory wipes, in order to save Aunt May, in one of Marvel's most contrived moments in the publisher's history. The reason for that was very simple. They didn't want Peter to be a married man anymore, and instead wanted to turn the clock back a bit and reposition him to be a bit closer to the Spidey of the 60s and 70s. Then there's the films. If you think about it, every live-action series has kept him in high school a little longer than the one before. Half a movie in the Raimi trilogy, an entire movie and a graduation scene in the second in Webb's films, and 3 whole movies in the MCU trilogy. And there's nothing wrong with high school Spider-Man stories, obviously. Some of my favorite Spidey, from the pages of early Ultimate comics to episodes of Spectacular Spider-Man, use the setting really well. It's just that with so much Spider-Man being out there, I think it's time to really embrace letting at least certain versions of the characters age. So that's what I really wanted to talk about this video. Of course, tell me what you think down in the comments, and if you like and subscribe, this video will probably get shared to more people.
Spider-Man attacked us at the Aberdeen Harbor.
So, okay, when talking about this subject, there's a few elephants in the room you just have to mention. The first is probably the most obvious. Yes, there are older versions of Peter Parker that appear in both Into the Spider-Verse and No Way Home. And whether you're talking about Jake Johnson's animated version, Tobey Maguire's big comeback, or Andrew Garfield's charismatic return, all 3 were well received by fans. But none of these films center around those characters, as they're more mentor figures to Miles Morales or to the MCU's Peter. Which is fine, but it's a very different thing than a movie about an older Peter where he's the emotional core of the story being told. Secondly, there's the PS4 game, which does manage to set itself apart in Spider-Man adaptations by focusing on a Peter in his mid-20s, one who is well out of high school and has even already had a past relationship with MJ when we meet him. He's not old here by any means, just a little older than a lot of the high school versions we've had lately, and I really hope this version of Peter continues to grow and isn't stuck in the arrested development that the comic book version has found himself in so many times, where no matter what happens, the reset button will be pressed and things will revert to Peter being a single, youngish guy living with roommates. Again, nothing wrong with that, it's a perfectly good jumping off point for Spidey stories. We've just seen it so many times at this point. Speaking of comics, there is one title I really wanted to highlight here: Chip Zdarsky and Mark Bagley's SpiderMan Life story, which has a very simple, very effective premise. Treating Peter Parker's journey as if it occurred in real time, and watching him age from the early 60s onward. Not only was this one of the best Spidey stories of the past decade, I think it offered a really tantalizing look at the story possibilities that open up if you allow the webhead to age. It creates new avenues of storytelling, new barriers for Peter, and a chance to see the lessons that Spider-Man learns in his adventures really play out in his life. Years ago now, I made a video about Into the Spider-Verse and how fascinated I was by its Peter Parker, comparing him to an aging athlete, battling injuries and trying to stay agile and game ready for as long as possible. And honestly, that's an aspect of superhero fiction that I've always found fascinating, and Spider-Man is a great hero to use that way. So many of the classic Spider-Man moments are him straining to lift a concrete wall or collapsing after stopping a speeding train. He's powerful, yes, but this isn't easy for him. That pairs really well with storylines about the character aging, as we see him try to fight back the years and try to be the hero that people expect him to be for as long as humanly possible. But Peter getting older isn't just interesting because we have to see him adjust to his aging powers, it's also a real chance to look at the relationships in his life in a very different light. I'm obviously okay with Peter being unmarried, that is the majority of Spider-Man, but modern Marvel's reluctance to even entertain the idea of Spider-Man getting married or just being in a different phase of life, I find a little weird. 2015's Renew Your Vows, which imagined a world where Peter and MJ remained married and had a daughter, started a lot stronger than it ended, but I do think it served as a sign that yes, Spider-Man being married isn't automatically terrible. Not that it's automatically good either, but there's plenty of great Spider-Man comics where he's married and vice versa. Mostly, it's just not something we've seen a lot of in decades, and the premise of Peter Parker moving beyond high school and college romances into a more stable home life is something that actually feels fresh at this point. I know I'm a lot more invested in the romance between MJ and Peter in the PS4 game, where they have a lot of baggage from the past but still deeply respect each other, more than the fun but ultimately lightweight high school romance of the recent movies. Now that relationship did work well for those films, but I think the PS4 game does a better job at fleshing out that relationship and making it feel three-dimensional, something that's really aided by the fact that these are two adults with years of history together. Now, I don't want this to come off as too harsh on the high school hero version of the character. In the original comics, he actually graduated high school surprisingly early in the book's run, and I think it was smart of comics like Ultimate and Untold Tales to go back and tell new stories there. But that's become the default in adaptations through the years, to the point that the PS4 games really feel like a breath of fresh air in comparison. Spider-Man is one of the most beloved characters of the past century, and we've seen how well he can work in projects that span completely different tones. Everything from the classic Ditko and Lee comics, to Saturday morning cartoons, to the darkness of Kraven's Last Hunt and beyond. Like Batman before him, he's a highly versatile character, so I think it would be great, especially after so many Spider-Man movies, to really let him embrace that. No Way Home set up a new status quo for the webhead. Whether Holland wants to stick around or not remains to be seen, but it's clear that there's an opportunity here to move the character in a new direction. And with these actors now being quite a bit older than the characters they're playing, maybe a time jump would be the right move for the movie franchise, giving us an older Peter. Or, since Sony obviously has no plans to stop releasing these things, we actually give Holland more than 3 or 4 movies and check in with his Peter every few years as the character ages. I still really do like him in the role, and I think that it would be a great way to let him develop his take on Peter and move totally beyond the high school hijinks. Either way, I think there's a ton of possibility there, and I'd love to see an adaptation of Life's story, though a Spider-Man period piece may kind of be an unlikely hard sell. Either way, Peter Parker is a great character, and one that can hold up to a lot of change and being put in a lot of different scenarios. I hope Marvel eventually does a better job of recognizing that, and letting Peter age and change in new and interesting ways, even if his mission stays the same.
Coward. Even for you.
Says the guy frantically erasing his search history.
After all these years, you're still just an ignorant child.
True, but that's part of my charm, isn't it?
If there's one constant with Peter Parker, it's that the man loves math and science, which is why he'd probably appreciate Brilliant. Brilliant is all about being the interactive learning platform that lets you tackle new math, science, and computer science concepts in fun, hands-on ways. Everyday math is a topic I always return to because it has helped me build so many new skills in an area of learning that I always had a tough time with. That gave me a fresh start by refocusing on the foundations of math and building my knowledge from the ground up. Because what Brilliant is really great at is taking a topic that you might find intimidating and giving you the tools to tackle them. With Brilliant, you learn by doing, at your own pace and on your own schedule. So it's never been easier to jump into these subjects head on. So go to brilliant.org/midnight and try it for free, and the first 200 people to go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.